Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Vincent Green.
I'm your host, Noel Gentoo.
We got Karen Mack in the back, and this is Talking Points. Let's get to it, motherfuckers. All right, Noli, you're going to say something smart there, but I cut you off. Amazing.
It hadn't come to me, so if anything, you
drifting towards the microphone. So this week's Talking Point is we're going to look at have foreign language movies become mainstream in English-speaking pop culture, or even foreign language, kind of like not even just foreign language movies, but foreign language medium art forms. A lot of this focus kind of goes on, the Far East Asia, where you look at J horror or K-pop or K-horror or all these things that bled in from Japan and South Korea, and how they have not only become popularized in Western culture, but they become megastars. Like a lot of these content creators or the content they've created themselves. So do you think that is a fair question to ask? And do you think that this is another show of force from fans that a lot of the medium or a lot of the kind of content that we ingest has become dated or tropish or regurgitated?
Formulaic. Although tropish is another way of saying it, but it's extremely. And I remember just kind of a funny little anecdote by John Oliver when he was on, I don't know, one of the Jimmys or, Colbert or something like that. But they had Blackpink, I think they're called, or something, they're a K-pop band. And he was like, I showed up. And it was like, wow, people are really excited to see me. But no, it was thousands of people who would showed up insanely to see this K-pop band. So there all of a sudden it's not. When you're on Netflix now, it's no longer such a scary thing to see that. Wait, those aren't Western names. Yeah. They look like Russian names. Sputnik was one of the most phenomenal horror films I've seen in the last couple of years. It doesn't. We've seen Hollywood is kind of regurgitated. Don't get me wrong, it's got a lot right, but it's been regurgitating so much that now I just kind of go yes, you know what? I will watch this show and I will watch this and. I always had, but I definitely do it more. And Parasite winning an Oscar definitely kind of set this ripple effect, I think, around the world where people are like, just go for it. Don't go to Hollywood and try and westernize it. Go for it.
Even the likes of is it Bong Joon-ho that did Parasite? He directed Snowpiercer, even though that's an English-speaking movie. Aesthetically, it looked quite Asian, and the way they brought the futuristic aspects of the movie to life, kind of like anime-ish, nearly like. But it's just I think nowadays when you have all these people that have grown up in manga and anime like yourself, not so much me, but that they're more open to these kind of different versions or these forms of entertainment, and we don't mind, especially horror fans, we don't mind sitting through a Japanese horror if it's subtitled, or Korean horror if it's subtitled, or Indonesian or Thailand or all these cool countries that come up with all this really cool horror content for years and years and years. Have done it, and we're kind of more ingratiated into this kind of circle that when a foreign language movie comes up, we just go, what's the story like? We don't even think about, is it from Korea? Is it from Japan? Or if we do,
is it good?
Yeah, is it good? Exactly. So I think a lot of horror fans, because we've grown up with K horror or J horror, or we've grown up with this kind of low budget horror from kind of Central Asia or whatever, that when it came to the likes of a Squid Game or a Parasite or Train to Busan, or I even go back a little bit further, The Host, when it came to these movies and they came a bit more mainstream, we were there from day one, because in the same way we would be with a good foreign language horror, we just look at the story. We don't care who's telling the story or who's in the story or what way it's portrayed. We just want it to be good. And I think that's why a lot of horror fans are probably a lot more kind of open-minded when it comes to...
Yeah, it was an easier transition, I think, for horror fans, because The Grudge, The Eye, and films like that, The Ring, were all these absolute must. If you were talking to somebody about horror movies, they go, have you seen it? Have you seen it? Because these are some of the best horror films I've seen. And when a lot of these films got westernized to various amounts of success, you would say that, no, I actually preferred the original version. And there is something about that Western form. It's not just that something being in a foreign language is less scary to you now that you have to read subtitles. It's also works both ways, where something that's Americanized, you're kind of going, I feel like I've seen this before.
Because you have.
And we have been spoiled, and you have. And we've been spoiled by Hollywood. I mean, I've been entertained thousands and tens of thousands of hours of my life, but that just mean when I start seeing a lot of the same film over and over again, it's why I don't watch rom-coms, it's why I don't watch a lot of American comedy films. is because I find them to be extremely formulaic. So when something like a Parasite or something like a Squid Game comes along, I'm just thinking, more, please.
Just something different.
Don't care.
Just something different. That's not like
something truly. And I also find people are kind of daunted by subtitles. Although Carol brought this up, our man in the back. Dubbing is a crime, usually. There was some show that a friend of mine was telling me, shout out Seamus, that I should watch only for the bad dubbing. I think it was as a German show, but they had like somebody from Wales and Scotland and America and South Africa, and they all like grew up together in the same neighborhood. You know what I mean? Like, and you know, it was absolutely insane. But I do think, when you're reading subtitles for a while, you kind of forget that you are.
You get immersed in the story.
You get immersed in the story, and you're just kind of like bouncing down to the bottom of the screen and back up.
Yeah, it's like reading a comic book. You read the script and then you take in the visuals. Like it's very easy to do. Like, but, you know,
English speaking people have been so spoiled for so long that I've been to. I used to live in Vienna for a brief period of time, and a guy from Serbia, I asked him why his English is so good. He goes, "We don't dub our TV, and a lot of our entertainment is Western." So I've just been reading words against against what I'm hearing. I've been reading Serbian words or whatever.
You contextualize them and you create.
And he contextualize, and he doesn't even know he's doing it. They're like a child learning language. He doesn't know he's doing it. He suddenly, so that's the word for father. And that's the word for pitch, and that's the word for absolutely anything.
Nearly almost any Spanish that I know is from watching Spanish shows, and then you see the repetitions of certain words in the subtitles to what you hear, and then you're like, "Oh, that means this, and this means this."
That must be exactly.
Like, you know. So,
but we were so spoiled for so long. These people can learn entire languages, but all of our entertainment came Westernized, so we were almost afraid, or we were above it. And then they said, "But what about this undeniably good show?" And you kind of go, fair.
I think though, like when it comes to horror, when you do dub it or you do Westernize it, if it's like from an Eastern culture, or you know, if it's from Russia or something, you make an Americanized version or whatever, that I think you lose some of that cultural impact in the translation almost.
Yes.
Like in the same way dubbing, remaking, it just, you don't catch, like when you dub something, you lose out on those little idiosyncrasies. The what's the word I'm looking for? When you speak,
idioms, like colloquial metaphors.
There weren't the words.
Colloquial.
They're way fancier than what I was going for. But you know when someone speaks the kind of the pattern, their speech patterns. It's not the word I was thinking of, but it's close to. But like, so when someone's conveying an emotion and the way they do it on screen,
in the way a Cockney would, or in the way
exactly. Somebody, like, you know, it's just those certain little things that don't translate if you dub it, or the story itself, maybe because it's rooted so deeply in the culture that it came from originally, doesn't translate. Like a Grudge or a Ringu, like, you know, you translate these movies over and you try to Westernize them, or you put an American girl there, it doesn't have the same effect because she isn't growing up, or she's not as well rooted in the legend, the lore, the metaphors. Like if I got a Banshee story and put an American there, it wouldn't make much sense, because it wouldn't have the same sort of scare factor as it would to an Irish person, because we're so rooted in the tales of Banshees.
And you can't get away from lore. Lore is lore. It is established, and it's been established for hundreds of years. And you kind of go like, no, let's just, we need to make it, and it needs to be based in LA. And it needs to be, well, then we can't use this. Look, the quickest and easiest way to do this is to do this. And
now it has to be in
Little
Tokyo, in the middle of Los Angeles, like instead of being in Tokyo. No, now we're going to have a foreign exchange student go to Japan. Like, come on, like, seriously, could you pick any more of an American-looking person than Sarah Michelle Gellar? Like, in all fairness.
No, you really, really couldn't.
Like, they could have
she was an all-American girl.
Could easily made that story with an Asian actor and had her go back then, even like, it's like, oh, I'm going to visit my uncle for the summer or some shit.
But here's the thing, it's not Hollywood's fault, it's our fault. Because they'll only ever do what we want them to. They'll only ever do what they think we want. And if it makes money, then they must think that's what we want. And now when something like in the last, you think about the last 2 years, it's the reason we were having this conversation. We can talk about all these classic films that broke through. Again, you could talk about Ring. But we had Squid Game and we had Parasite in the last couple of years. And we've had Train to Busan. And we've had, these films like breaking through. And now it feels like something that definitely has never happened. Like, it's not that it's never happened, but well, an Oscar speaks for itself, but now it's like, wow, have you got competition? And I think yes, and I'm so grateful
Yeah.
for it because I want Hollywood on its
I think
toes.
it's funny because we're speaking about the uniqueness of Korean cinema, in particular, at the moment, and a lot of it, if you look at Korean culture in itself, is actually taking a lot of its cues from American culture. So, like,
Yeah, and it's probably very typical for them.
yeah,
Like, it's not like we only know what we've absorbed an awful lot
yeah,
of, and that's American.
yeah. Well, like that's the thing. Yeah. So, like, I think because that's why I mentioned horror fans in particular going because when you're a horror fan, you become a horror junkie, so you start looking for all these different ways of getting scared because you're chasing that scare dragon.
Yeah,
So that's why you,
sucking dicks for
yeah, sucking
scares.
dicks
Yeah,
for scares, and just like I want them scares all over my face. But so
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
eventually, what happens is you run out of content for whatever subgenre you're searching in or whatever fucking era you're looking at, and you end up venturing into foreign language iterations from that time or what that subgenre. And that's what I mentioned about horror people or horror fans in the same way manga and anime fans have gone in search for this content, no matter the language or no matter the culture or country it came from. But like it just we looked at it, we're like, okay, we need more scares. Or if you're a manga fan or an anime fan, I just need to see more cool shit. I don't care if it comes from
yeah.
Japan. I don't care if it comes from Korea or whatever. And then you start branching
Yes.
out further and further and further. And to you, it seems like an everyday thing when you like, and people go to you like, "Oh, Squid Game, you heard that?" And then when you hear someone say to you that would never watch these films in a million years, then you know, oh, that's mainstream now. Because it's like that show. What's it called? Heist or something. Is it an Indian show? Bank Heist or something.
Never watched it,
Yeah,
but
but
I've
it's
seen
like
trailers.
a cultural fucking juggernaut, and like a lot of people watch it. I've never watched it, but like it's that kind of thing where you're seeing now because of streaming services that more and more people are
Yeah, the world's small, man.
yeah
The world is small now. It
they're
really
being
is.
exposed though more because it's there in front of them, whereas they wouldn't seek it out. Is what I mean. Like whereas when people
Yeah,
that like if you're a horror fan or a comic fan, you're always looking for new content, new ways of chasing that dragon. But if you're just a mainstream casual fan of movies or TV series, you won't seek out a Korean show. But if it comes up, you see a trailer, you might overlook the fact that you're like, well, I've never seen a Korean show, but it sounds interesting. And if you ask that question, it sounds interesting. Oftentimes you go and watch it, at least some of it,
yeah. And that's why we're sitting here and we're actually even having this conversation. I just think that while there's been a plateau in the Western world, in my humble view,
Yeah.
that there has been a raising of your game. Again, when we sat down and me and you did probably almost a year ago now, we did Sputnik, and I heard good things, read good things, said right, I watch it, but I was expecting a pretty low bar in terms of special effects because that's what I had been exposed
Yeah.
to before. It was like, yeah, they can do this, but they can't hit Hollywood. Then I was like, wow, the special effects were absolutely spectacular. The acting was absolutely spectacular. The story was spectacular, and the execution was
Yeah.
spectacular. And I just walked away going, well, that was actually a great film,
Yeah.
like a great film. And I don't say that about many films. Not that they're truly great, you know. And I was kind of going, yeah, that's what I want from a horror
Yeah.
film. And Russia did
Yeah.
it. And now I just realized that maybe because don't forget, like obviously special effects, everything comes along and it becomes more
Yeah.
accessible, and maybe you can do it on a lesser budget because obviously Hollywood can't be competed with for budgets and
I
exposure
think
and
it's a
stuff like
case
that.
though of like you nearly have seen every single scenario that can happen in America in terms of horror. But when you look at like a Sputnik, you're like, oh, what's it like if you have an alien movie that's quite similar to Venom, but
Yeah.
happened in Soviet era Russia, where the levels of secrecy were like next to none, maybe or maybe
Yes,
Mao era China or something, that kind of thing.
that's
It
it.
just
Because America can give you the fiction of what if the Nazis won the
yeah.
war, and it can give you a show, but like this is actually would have been behind the Iron
Yeah,
Curtain,
and it's
and that's so
and it's
fascinating to
directed by
me.
a person that probably grew up in Soviet era Russia and knew, you know what I
Absolutely.
mean?
But this is and the complete twist on that, like the polarity of that is like even when I was a kid, and I mean a kid, I used to like go up to my grand's a lot, and she used to love watching old films, and I always got annoyed by the Nazis being just speaking with German
Yeah,
accents, bad German
yeah,
accents, and I was like, I could read. Like I'm just 10 or 11, 12, and I could just put it up on the screen. I'll read it.
yeah,
I don't know the language, but I'll read it.
yeah.
and then go back to the other guys. I remember even being that young and just being completely taken out because there's no way that behind enemy lines under fire that you decided this is the time that I'm going to practice my English. There's no fucking way, And I wonder if there's many Russian. I haven't seen enough Russian. I imagine there's many Russian films and there's somebody going like, "I'll have a non-dairy creamer," like, in Russian. Yeah. And instead of comrade, they say chum or something like that. Like,
I think like what people are looking at now is just we're fed up with the reboot, the remake, the sequel, the expansion, the adaptation, all these things.
Origin story. Yeah. We're sick of the origin story.
And I just think that like even if something is crafted in something that's similar to what we already know, like we mentioned Sputnik being quite similar to Venom in a lot of ways, heroic astronaut goes on a mission, brings an alien parasite back with him. Pretty much identical to Venom, except that it's what happens if Venom set during Soviet era Russia. It's just like a big what if, and that's what I think. Like a lot of horror from around the world can offer us something new. Because what I would love to see, I'd love to see more German horror set back during the time of the Nazis and how they would perceive the threat during the Nazi era Germany and stuff like that. Because it's very easy, or it's very, I don't know, not maybe very easy or very common or whatever. It's just a very, like, when you're looking at something from the outside in, it's very easy for us to perceive it in a way that we want it to be, like, that kind of way. So, but
or imagine it to be.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but to have it kind of crafted in a real world way, in a way that we can understand, like a Ringu or Grudge, and what those mythologies have that are based definitely in Japanese culture, that like we wouldn't have an understanding of them, even if we read it from a book or whatever. If we looked at it from the outside, we were like, oh, they probably think it's this, but they know, like, it's like a nighttime story. It's like the Boogeyman. It's like when you're a kid, there's nothing scared you as much as the Boogeyman. And like, in every kind of version has their own, every kind of culture around the world has their own Boogeyman. But the way we perceive that Boogeyman is completely different. So like your Boogeyman and my Boogeyman might have similar similarities, but like,
yeah, no, you're right.
But the way we perceive, because the culture we grew up in.
Bring a child to a child therapist and say, describe him, and have that person draw it, and you will have a completely different renderings, absolutely across the board.
Yeah,
but it's great. Like you're saying, like if somebody from behind the Iron Curtain read Sputnik, then there's something so authentic that just translates instantly.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, like,
And no matter how great an American director is, they mightn't be able to capture that. And that's not their fault. It's because it's not their experience. And it's not something they can learn in school. And it's not quite something you can read. Somebody who got it, like who was absolutely there. It's experience versus book knowledge. Yeah. And somebody who has both.
Yeah, exactly.
Can go and make a better version than you. And I'm sorry, Mr. Spielberg, and I'm sorry, Mr. Whoever. He just simply can.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. And there's that X factor, that's the thing you can't put a name on. You feel it when you're watching something.
It's like when you watch The Hole in the Ground. Lee Cronin, an Irishman, grew up with everybody knows about the changeling lore in Ireland. That like, even though it's not foreign language, that like it takes an Irishman oftentimes to tell that story correctly, because we were growing up. We grew up with that kind of like that lore. It's like I mentioned with the Banshee. So if you want to talk to me about, I think it's the Japanese version of zombies, like they call it Gentoo or something. It's like it comes from a Chinese word or something. So if you want to talk to me about that, like for me, like Noel, you know about certain things that I'm planning, but like for me, looking out, I'm going to have a different idea completely of someone that grew up in Japan or grew up in China with that mythology. It kind of, I just think sometimes when you're bathed in something, that you come up with this total different perception of something, because even though it's lore or like mythology, you remember being scared enough about it as a kid that when it...
You remember your grandmother literally telling you a scary story, and if you didn't do this by this time, somebody would come and take your voice away. Or something like that. So we were kids being told that the wind would change directions. Yeah, I mean,
if you see a comb, it's a Banshee's comb and shit like that, like,
Oh yeah, exactly. A shit that me and you know, just the shit that shit that we kids, older kids, told us that we took on board. Again, you said about the Banshee's comb, or that death was near if you heard them cry, and stuff like that. I grew up on that shit. Like,
if you get scared enough by something as a kid, then no matter how stupid it seems, it will always leave a residue on you as an adult. And you will perceive your horror, or the horror that you're speaking of, a totally different way than someone that comes upon it when they're an adult, because they've never been scared about it, and they'd be scared by it when they're in their formative years. So they're going to be like, "That sounds stupid," but you're like, "Yeah, but when I was 6, you know what I mean?"
When I was 6,
yeah. So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and you know what else? Everything about being 6 is stupid. Like everything.
You know what I mean?
You
like,
know?
so when you go into these different cultures and they have these different lores, that they've been scared by these things, these creatures, these stories all their lives. So when they tell these stories as adults, and when they're adults, it resonates more because they've had that fear with them. But when we're what's the word look for? When we're kind of like exposed to it later on, it's not as scary to us. And even to try translate it in the same way would probably not be as scary as it would be if it was told by someone that was
of course, because there's no matter how great the storytelling is, it's simply a case of time. It was introduced to you as a man in his 30s, it was introduced to you as a man in his 20s, 90s. It doesn't there. That's when it became real for you. And I do think if something can tap you in your informative years. Again, I don't think an American director could tell a Banshee story
unless he grew up in Ireland.
Unless he grew up in Ireland. Now, I think you can make one. It could be a good film, but I'm just saying like that the authenticity that even when you don't know, it bleeds into it. That the person who directed this. When I was watching Saving Private Ryan, I didn't realize that film hit me so hard when I watched it, and I watched it again, and I watched it again, and I obsessed about it so much that I started watching documentaries and behind the scenes kind of stuff. When you realize that Steven Spielberg would grew up in a Jewish family, and it was just had a huge appreciation for the absolute the true evil of a war.
He's a generation away from the Holocaust only.
Exactly, and also the actual horrors of war. Like nobody Rambo'd in Saving Private Ryan. They didn't survive. They got lucky, or they were smart, or whatever. But nobody Rambo'd. Nobody. It was horrible, and it was evil, and it was human, and it was absolutely barbaric. But that just led across. Now, I have no idea what that experience must be like. I have no idea. But when I was watching it, I felt that authenticity. I just fucking felt it. And that's the thing I cannot put a word on. You could say genuine, you can say all these things, but I just don't think that there is a word that just, like, chef's kiss. I just don't have that word. But there is, of course. And I think that's why a lot of people, you're watching these kind of quite formulaic horror films that have been thrown out. Bitchy fucking daughter that's easily 26 who didn't want to leave her friends. The fresh start, the haunted house, the kid who's too young to be believed but understands things first. You know, all this. I'm so sick of it. And then I watch something like a Parasite, or I watch something like a Sputnik,
or a Squid Game.
A Squid Game, and you kind of go, wow, you know,
or Train to Busan.
These people, and they're exactly even the way people. Like I learned a bit about like Korean debt, like that the gambling, what life would be like for somebody there. It just felt new. It felt like undiscovered.
Exactly.
Now I just want more of it, and I feel like that's a bigger conversation now than it's ever been.
And I think like when you look at like it kind of shows that like what we said, that when you break down all the reasons why foreign language shows or foreign language movies are becoming more mainstream in air quotes, because like, you know, it's mainstream to us, that, like, you know what I mean? So it's because we've realized that a lot of these films or a lot of these shows don't necessarily translate well when they're westernized or when they're dubbed or whatever, and that the best way to view these things is to actually delve deep into the original culture, into the source material, look at what the original creators had in mind for this story, for the set of circumstances wanted to set up for its characters. And that's why a Squid Game, no matter if you want to throw 20 American remakes at it, it's never going to hit you in the same way as the original did. That's why if you want, I think there's going to be a Train to New York, an Americanized version of Train to Busan. It's not going to hit you in the same way because it was just so new and so different when Train to Busan. Because you look at like a place like Korea that is really overpopulated. So if like a zombie apocalypse happened, you would have a lot of people very close by and you're in the center.
It would be mad.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be mad. So, exactly.
So it just gives you that sense. It'd be kind of like if a zombie apocalypse happened in Hong Kong, just everything's so crammed together, you know, that kind of thing. So I just think like when you weigh up all the evidence, that people are starting to realize, what a lot of horror fans or a lot of comic fans have realized from the get-go for a long time now, is that to really enjoy these to the highest of their potential is you have to look at the original interpretation of them by the original creators.
Yes.
Because they're the ones that had the original vision, the original mindset.
You might actually enjoy the Western one even more if you just have enough that,
Sorry, you froze there for a second.
I completely agree because... Yeah, so did you, yeah. But I also think that you could even go and watch the American one and see, I see what they went for. They went for more of the... You actually end up... yeah, even if you don't end up liking it as much, you kind of go, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I see what they did. But there was something there is a uniqueness to it. But I'm glad that the conversation's happening now because we all had like 10 or 12 foreign like, I mean, don't forget, like, they're not all like really deep horror film. Like Shaun of the Dead exploded around the
Yeah.
world. Everyone loved it because it was
Completely
so
English.
undeniably completely English, ridiculous. Like the cornetto thing, it was actually even just sitting there as somebody who's just across the pond. We know England is not an unknown thing to us, so we know that it's so absolutely smacks of
Because
English.
of all the
Like
invasions.
we're waiting out down in the pub.
Is that why it's
like,
not unknown just because of all the invasions? The invasions.
Because of the
invasions.
Because of the
Yes,
invasions.
the invasions.
If we say it under
Because they occupied us for nearly a millennium.
Because of the famine, wink, wink.
Wink, wink, blight, blight.
Winking over a podcast.
It's become a radio play.
But it's true. It's smart. But I think people love that. I think people love the fact, and that's why with like they take a lot of Americans have tried to hit English shows, and the English humor is so insularly English that they try and take everything about the Inbetweeners that makes it great and just plop it in America, and it doesn't
exactly
work. And it's not that English people are more funny than American people. It's nothing like that. You've just taken something that is so that and tried to make it that, and it's just not the same thing. With the US Office didn't try and make the Office. They kind of just took the whole concept of a fly on the wall documentary about an everyday life at an office. That's it. That's all they took. They took that concept and they did their own thing. That's why that worked. That's why that was spectacular.
If you eat Chinese food in Ireland, it's going to taste completely different than the Chinese food you get in Beijing.
Oh yeah,
that kind of way, because the palettes that created it are completely different, like completely different tastes and flavors.
Oh yeah, I mean, they'd probably call it fast food. What we're getting, you know what I mean? Like, even
so that's kind of like the way it is with movies or TV shows. That no matter how you taste the food, your palate is completely different. So if you try to remake that, oftentimes you're going to end up using ingredients that you're more accustomed to than what was originally from the original recipe. So like a lot of times when movies are remade, you don't carry over the same cultural idioms or whatever, because you're going to revert back to type, or you're going to revert back to these tropes that you grew up with. So when you do remake a movie, no matter where it comes from, you're going to always give it this little American twang if you're an American.
Revert to type, you can't help it.
If you're going to give it a little Irish taste, if you're going to remake it in Ireland, same in England, America, all around the world. So I think what people are starting to understand now is that sometimes the best way to enjoy something is just to enjoy it for what it was originally, and not constantly keep looking for it to be remade in a way that better suits your palate. That kind of way.
You didn't need an American Inbetweeners. Go watch Inbetweeners. Yeah,
exactly. Because
it's fine. It's in your mother tongue.
It exists.
It's absolutely fine.
Exists,
like, you know what I mean? It's and they tried to do it with like Red Dwarf.
Yeah.
Of course, that was like one of the worst things I've ever seen, and they literally took the same script and just did it with Americans, but it did not work. And again, it's not about Americans or English people. No, it's not about anybody being funnier. It's about what fucking works.
Yeah, exactly.
Just don't.
It's about how it was created.
And there's nothing wrong.
Who it was created.
But imagine that was so westernized that a lot of Americans might have even watched something just because it's English. They would have liked to just seen it through the lens of an American. Yeah. And now people are just a little bit more experimental, and I, for one, applaud it, man. I think it's brilliant.
I was trying to drink some water and nothing came out. But I think like that's the thing. Like, people are just now, because of streaming and because of the internet and because of YouTube and because of the way cultures have kind of melded more and meshed around the world, that people now are ingesting and digesting things that are completely different than what they would have done 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And it's awesome because now we're getting to see these creators make stuff, not having to worry about when the American remake is going to be made, that a wider audience is actually going to see their story in a bastardized version. But now we're getting to see the stuff that's original. We're getting to see it in the way that it was intended to be seen. And I think we're all going to benefit, because you're going to see a hashtag Alive, you're going to see Train to Busan, The Host, Squid Game, Parasite. You're going to see all these awesome things, and you're not going to have to wait 10 years to see a diluted version of it.
You never had to, and that's the thing. You also realize that. You never had to. It was never, yeah, and it was, and I one of the things, it's a very negative time, I think, in the world right now. One of the things I absolutely applaud is that we're just got a little bit more experimental, that we got a little bit outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
That we want to see what it's like living in modern Korea.
Yeah.
That we want to see what it's like living in 1980s Russia. I love it. I'm down for all of it. I think it lends scope. I think it lends scope for people's storytelling. Like you were right now trying to absorb as much Eastern history as you absolutely can. Well, isn't it great that there is actually
Japan right now? It's insane.
Exactly, but isn't it great that there's actual context, actual stuff that you can look at that's becoming more mainstream that you can learn from. And again, we both agree that it doesn't make you like somebody who understands what it's like to have grown up during the 1990s in China or something like that. It doesn't, but it's accessible.
It gives you the
and you're learning.
It gives you the understanding through the perception that you need to understand the person that lived in that time or the person that grew up in that time.
Yes,
and not about how you perceive things. It's not. There's one, as we said, there's one thing looking out inward from the outward, but if you can try and see a story through a character's eyes that's experiencing it in the way that they experience it, like, and that's completely different in the way you can experience that situation, then that's why I think foreign language movies are important.
Storytelling.
It's the way you can perceive the world through their eyes and get a completely different understanding of their environment, you know. So, and I think people are starting to see that now, and that's why we're seeing more mainstream appeal, more mainstream love for foreign language content, and like long may it continue.
Do you applaud it? Are you 100%?
Because as I said, like I've been watching Asian movies since I was like 14 or something, like in search of new horror. So like, you know, that's just the way I've been. So it's second nature to me. I watch Spanish language shows the whole time. Narcos, like I watched that show recently about El Chapo. I'm like, as long as the story is good, I don't give a fuck what language is behind the subtitles, because I'll read the subtitles, I'll be engrossed by the story if it's good enough. And as I said to you, it's like comic books. You read the script, you look at the visuals, and then you enjoy the story in the exact same way.
Yes, absolutely. And you know, even just before we sign out, I just wanted to say one thing, and it's definitely on a lighter note, but I've become so westernized in all of my entertainment. Anytime I was watching a few Irish films recently and hearing somebody on screen with a genuine Irish accent, even though they sound exactly like me, was bizarre.
Yeah, because
I don't even hear the American. Like if I'm talking to an American, if I'm talking to an American, I hear the accent quite dramatically. Yeah. It's there. It's very obvious. But when I'm watching something, I've got so many thousands of hours built into my brain of that's what people sound like when I look at them on the TV. That hearing an Irish accent, hearing somebody like Brendan Sheehan, who was born like, you know, less than a mile from my home, speaking is just a little bit odd to me. You know what I mean? It's so strange. And I'm glad that I'm really glad that we're expanding her horizons. I think that'll be the last point.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Like expanding your horizons is the fucking best thing to do. Like, and especially because, as I said, you don't have to wait 5 or 10 years to see a bastardized, diluted version of the original source material. That it's just going to lead you back to the original source material anyway, that you could have watched well beforehand if you just had a little bit of an open mind and weren't afraid to watch something with a subtitle. You know what I mean? Like
you're looking at 2025, 2026, and it's been waiting for you.
And a better version. The version.
Yeah, and a better version
that was so good that they decided to remake it.
You've been cheating yourself.
Yeah,
it's not the crazy.
You know.
Thing.
So before we get the fuck out here, Noel, you for this fucking wave of foreign language movies and TV shows?
I wish it comes as aggressive and as hard as it possibly can.
You made that sound kind of sexual, but
and I meant it.
I'm the same. So hopefully we get to see loads more stuff. Unfortunately, we're going to see a Squid Game season 2, which I think is going to ruin Squid Game season 1.
It's going to be. I actually completely agree.
So
I think it's such a
so
bad
hopefully
idea.
now
anyway.
we don't see the same shitty ideas, or not shitty ideas, but the same shitty traits going forward. Hopefully, if they are successful, they keep making new things, and I'll keep expanding on stuff that's already there. So all I'm saying is,
absolutely.
Hopefully, because foreign language things, content becomes more mainstream, that people be exposed to better or different types of storytelling. But hopefully, those storytellers don't fall into the same traps that Westernized cinema have. That's all I'm going to say.
Excellent.
So I'm your host, Vincent Green.
I'm your host, Alton Tui.
Mac in the back, and that was Talking Pints. And we'll see you next time, motherfuckers. Peace.
Ciao.
Yow.